Far From Heaven is about another way of telling stories. It's for Todd about seeing our world through a contemporary version of past eyes.
This film is a tribute to the films of Douglas Sirk and the great Hollywood tradition of the women's film.
Oh, Ron, I love you so much.
Acclaimed as the master of 50s Hollywood melodrama, Douglas Sirk staged socially conscious stories filled with larger-than-life emotions, music, and imagery. In Far From Heaven, Haynes replicates Sirk's lush style while maintaining a modern point of view.
What did Hollywood tell us about the 50s? We have a way of reducing that era to a series of sort of keynote ideas. And I kind of wanted to play with that and beg the question, how far really have we come from that outmoded, highly conservative period in American culture?
Far From Heaven is about the fracturing of that myth.
Julianne Moore plays Kathy Whitaker, who's the central protagonist in the film. Her husband is played by Dennis Quaid, who's head of a TV sales company, very successful.
Marlene, see if you can reschedule the production review for dinner, and could you get my wife on the phone, please?
I think the wife has gotten accustomed to the idea that there's a sort of automation in life. You have your cocktail parties, you appear at your husband's side, but then we find out that he has other yearnings.
I'm working late at the office one night, and she brings me dinner as quite a surprise. She catches me with another guy.
And at the same time, Kathy has become friends with her gardener, Raymond Deegan, played by Dennis Haysbert. The scene that directly precedes the party scene in the film is a sort of ladies' auxiliary hosted art show that her best friend Eleanor has put on. She discovers Raymond there with his daughter. They strike up a conversation, but it creates a whole sort of series of looks and whispers. The discussion about her sort of public sympathies for the black cause.
Oh, well, honey, everything looks just marvelous. Kathy, who on earth is that man? You have this whole place in a clamor.
And then we go right into this annual party scene.
Everything else is always candy-coated and denied. This is the scene where he's coming apart and that they're coming apart.
Every year, Kathy Whitaker and her best friend Eleanor put on a gala sort of annual party.
It's a moment that has been alluded to throughout the story.
Well, I'll call the caterer in the morning. You confirm with Dorothy on the deposit, and honey, we're in business.
The party scene is extremely important because it's the first time we see Kathy as hostess in her own home.
Kathy is trying very much to put a public face on the difficulties she's facing in her marriage.
During the course of the evening, Frank is getting drunk because he already has a situation he can't handle emotionally, and he knows it.
How about this girl going and getting her husband another drink?
Darling, don't you think you've already had it?
No, I don't think I've had it.
I just like
This is a guy who's really desperate. He wants to be normal. He doesn't want to be the person that he is.
When the scene is over and the people leave, he approaches his wife and grabs her. It looks like he intends to have some sort of really violent sex with her.
What's happening? I can't even... God!
And is unable.
And ultimately, it will explode in front of her.
Frank, you're all meant to me. You're all mad.
Stop it!
That is the moment at which you realize the house is coming down.
What was interesting about melodrama was the idea that you could enter people's emotions through artifice.
Todd wanted us to build a set that looked like a set. Most of what you do in my job is try to make sets that don't look like you built them. You try to design yourself out of the story so that it feels normal.
We were drawing exclusively from the world of film. This was not really about Hartford, Connecticut in 1957. It was about how that would be depicted through a Hollywood soundstage idea. One of the most amazing parts of the planning of this film was the ability, the luxury, to create a set, a house, almost to create the shots you want to create at an architectural level.
We were very instrumental in trying to create certain tension and release visually by the architecture to create, again, the emotional context of the characters, the emotional feelings of the characters.
We changed the levels of the floors. By creating these different staging levels, It created the ability to see more of the characters at one time and let them interact in other ways.
In this world, there was a certain kind of oppression, so higher angles could create this feeling of oppression. Lower angles can create some kind of heroic.
When Kathy's being talked down to for being a friend of the Negro.
Some very attractive ones, in fact. Noted, I'm told, for their kindness to Negroes.
Oh, Dick, stop.
When you're seeing a ceiling behind someone's head in a low angle, you feel that kind of weight of the sort of bourgeois space, you know, teeming down over the person's head.
In addition to using architecture as an emotional device, Haynes and his team faced the challenge of creating a visual world that would help underscore Frank and Kathy's social suffocation.
The inner rage and fire of what's going on in these people's lives is somehow coming out in the scenery because it can't come out in the way they interact with one another.
I created a really big, luscious, sumptuous book of images. Everything from film references to historical images to paintings to photography.
In many ways, the process of deciding what furniture and what decor is in a home is also the process for a director of painting the backstory of their characters. And Todd and I chose every piece of furniture very carefully. There's just a sense of everything being amped up.
The surface beauty becomes kind of a statement of the repression that's happening to the characters.
Kathy, who doesn't seem to have an outlet for anything really in her life, actually has it in her clothes.
When I designed the dress for Kathy for the party scene, obviously I had several things to think about. She had to look fabulous.
Sandy chose kind of a burgundy color, and I think the color itself is most expressive of where Kathy is.
Todd was very specific about his use of colors. He'd cut up a Pantone book and had little colors alongside every scene, which were his feelings for each scene.
This is one of the few times in the film we see her in kind of a deep tone. It's not as light or as happy as some of the blues and the lilacs that you've seen her in before.
It's interesting because it's an evening scene, it's a party scene, therefore it's quite glamorous. It's probably the most glamorous scene in the film. It's also the first time that somebody refers to her sexuality.
Oh, by golly, there she is now, the purtiest gal in her room.
And we've never really thought of her before as being a sexual object. She's always been like the perfect wife and mother. So there had to be something a little bit sexy about the dress, but not overt, like she hasn't done it on purpose.
She's made this kind of lacy top and really fitted bodice and really sexy skirt. You know, so you see that she's a sexual being, and she's very beautifully turned out, and her husband doesn't have the least bit of interest in her.
I still say Frank is the luckiest guy in town.
Hear, hear. It's all smoke and mirrors, fellas. That's all it is. You should see her without her face on.
Despite the challenges inherent in creating a wardrobe that subtly complemented Kathy's inner feelings, the film's creators faced a much larger dilemma.
The biggest challenge of all was Julianne's pregnancy. We had to build every one of her costumes, and I made them all with massive seam allowances, so that at the beginning of the movie, you know, she wears them as they are, and then they would gradually let out. She did actually go from a 26-inch waist to a 36-inch waist during the course of filming, which we had to somehow accommodate. It's actually quite difficult doing any period film nowadays because actors and actresses' bodies have changed. A lot of women now are very skinny and muscly, which is completely wrong for a 50s shape. So in a way, I was fortunate that Julianne was pregnant. Even though it was a difficult thing, she did actually look fabulous being pregnant.